Hello, and my name is Ribblesdale, and I'm going to be judging the images for this competition this evening. And before we do that, I've been asked to show you some of my images and the type of photographs that I take. So let's get into that and let's have a look at just four of my pictures, just give you a little bit of a flavour of what I do as a photographer, and then we'll move on to judging the images for the competition. So, I don't really, as a photographer, have an absolute specialism. I'm one of these people that kind of gets involved in a whole bunch of stuff. I'll pretty much photograph anything. I do have my favourite kind of genres that I do like. I'm just going to show you four photographs, pretty much random at the moment, just to give you a flavour of what I do. So this first one, I think most of us do landscape photography, and this is one of mine. This is a pier in Scotland on the island of Mull, which is right outside a house that I stay in. And I've seen this pier over the years many times, and every time you look at this pier, it's completely different. And I think every time I've been there, I've photographed it probably most mornings as the tide's in different places. And I like this one because I like the tones of the blue, actually, and also it reminds me of a very special place to me. The second thing I like to photograph is sport, and sport is quite a great topic for photography. It's relatively easy to do. You just need access to the right places. You need to know where to go. Maybe make a little bit of effort, but I do like sport. And this is this girl here is actually the British champion jet ski racer. She lives up near us in Lancashire, and I like this picture as well because it captures the action and the spray, and this was used as part of my CAGB panel, and did rather well for me in that judging. Another thing that I do a lot of is concert photography, something that maybe not a lot of people get involved with a lot of the time, but it is quite a great and an interesting thing to do. Mixing two things, photography and music, for me is very exciting, and I get to go to a lot of concerts and take the pictures of the artists doing their stuff on stage. And this is one of mine from, I think, last year. This chap called Howard Jones, who's still touring as an 80s artist, and I like this one because it's got a degree of symmetry with the people in the background, and then Howard sort of slapped in the middle, just looking to one side. And then finally, I do a little bit of wildlife, not a massive amount of wildlife, but I do a little bit of wildlife, and this is one of my shots of a sea eagle taken in Scotland, and I like this picture purely because I've managed, it is by chance, you can't plan for this, by chance I've got the bird just as it gets to close in the water before it makes an almighty splash. And I just like the moment of this. It's the moment before the chaos, because as soon as that bird gets hold of that fish, the wings flap again, and there's water everywhere, and the bird's away. And this is just a frozen moment, which I quite like. Wildlife photographers may say it's not the greatest wildlife picture in the world, and it may not be. Very subjective thing, but I like it just because of it capturing that instant. The bird's claws go into the water, and there's no splash just yet. So that's the flavour of what I do as a photographer. And now let's start to get involved and have a look at the images that are in this competition. So here we go, and this is our first image, titled "A Nice Pair of ... So quite a bit of an innuendo there to start with. Now, these are obviously a pair of ladies, sort of here, looking very happy, looking straight into the camera. A mono shot, which is probably a good idea for this image, because otherwise, I don't know what the colours on the dresses were, but they could be rather busy. So maybe a good idea to drop that into mono. But what I'm finding with this image is the jumper, sorry, the cardigan jumper on the left hand side, which is very black and white with the hearts, and the tone of the black is very black. The tone seems to shift as we go across. So there's a lot of contrast in this girl on the left. And on the girl on the right, there's not as much contrast. And in fact, if we look here, that the tattoo on her arm almost looks very grey and starts to blend into the background there. And she's not as defined as the girl on the left is. But likewise, in the background, we've got darkness here that's maybe starting just to interfere a little bit with her hair in the background there. So there's the same issue on both sides. And then the sky, unfortunately, is very much blown out, which is fine, not an issue at all. But that highlight in the sky is starting to affect this girl's hair here. So I think this is a nice, fun shot. It's taken well. I think that the photographer has got the right pose, and with both girls looking really happy and looking straight into the camera. I just think that the tones of the mono conversion haven't really quite worked for this photographer. I'm going to score this one 15. So our second image is a landscape image, and the first thing that strikes you about this photograph is that sky. I mean, that sky is so vibrant. It just stands out above everything else. And when we move down into the hills and the mountains and the trees in the foreground, they are absolutely beautiful. And we look there at the line, just the break between the mountains and the sky. We've just got that real degree of separation. They look to be really standing out from the sky behind. Unfortunately, the light on the day is not overly favourable for the photographer, and it's quite a flat image in the foreground, and that is exaggerated by that sky, because no matter where you look in this image, your eyes are always drawn back up to that sky. I mean, that sky is amazing. It's very well caught, and I assume it's been polarized and maybe saturated a little bit more, but it really works. But I think the sky and the landscape don't quite match each other. But it is a very nice, pleasant landscape image. I'm going to score that one also 15. Arabian Nights. Now, this is a building shot, and the one thing that hits you straight away is the symmetry of this image. And you've got the spire in the middle, and then the spires on each side just slowly moving away to the smallest ones on the end. Then in the foreground, of course, we've got the fountain and the people, just to give it a little bit of additional interest. The colour of this shot really makes this image for me, because not only have we got the symmetry of the building, but then we've got this graduation of colour from purple on the left hand side right the way through the golds into the greens on the right hand side, and that breaks that symmetry to some extent, and I think that really works. I do like this image. I'm going to score this one 16. There's a chap stood outside his shed, and this shed is, this picture really works for me. It has the potential to go very, very wrong, but the photographer has handled it, I think, really well. So if we look at the components of this image, and we look in the background, and the background is extremely busy. There's bits of wood, there's tools, there's more wood, there's little tubes of things down here and bits of rubbish, and then the foreground, where the ground is all bitty and grass, and then the background, we've got more stuff piled up in the back of that shed, and that has the potential to be really, really busy and really distract from the main objects of the photograph, which of course is a gentleman. He stood there with on one leg, looking kind of relaxed, staring straight into the camera. But one thing I'd really notice about this chap is, A, he's pin sharp, but also the separation between him and the background really helps just to lift him away from that detail. Plus the fact the detail in the background is slightly soft, so it doesn't overly detract, and a nice vignette kind of just pulls us back in there. I think this image really works, and the one thing I would say that there's a potential improvement is this plank in the middle, and all these verticals do tend to create a barrier from the left-hand side of the image to the right-hand side of the image, and maybe something could be done with that. I'm not too sure what. Maybe a different crop. Maybe I don't know, but that just causes me a little bit of an issue. But I think this is a fantastic image. I'm going to score it 17. Now, here's a ballerina, and the immediate thing that strikes you about this photograph is the tones, the tonal range of that background coming down into the foreground with that chair. That chair just blends quite nicely. It stands out enough, but it's in that same tonal range as the background and the foreground and the girl herself. And I think the tones of this image are really good. What I would say is I think the ballerina's pose is maybe a little bit awkward. Particularly the left leg, which is obviously on the right of the photograph. That left leg just coming down just doesn't look quite ladylike, doesn't quite look like a dancer. And while she's doing something with her shoes and looking down at her shoes. Apologies, I do seem to have a siren in the background. I hope you can't hear that. As she's looking down at her shoes, you can notice that the fingers are kind of curled up a little bit, and I expect a ballerina to be graceful, and this lady doesn't look overly graceful at this moment in time. But it's a very nice image, and I do like the tones. I'm going to score this one 16. Beauty and the Beast. This is a lady on the back of a horse, and the one thing that you'll just look at the horse that jumps out at you straight away is the sharpness and the clarity in that horse is just amazing, and it really does stand out from the background, right the way from the front of its nose down to the where its neck hits the water. Its ears have gone a little bit soft, which I'm not overly concerned about, but that horse is absolute clarity in its own right. And then the girl's arm here is super sharp also. Unfortunately, the girl's face is a little bit soft, and with the title of the image, Beauty and the Beast, I would expect the focus to be the beauty, which is the girl, or maybe it's not. Maybe the focus is the horse and the girl's the beast. But I don't think so. I think the girl should be nice and sharp and clear, and be more of the main focus of this image, rather than the horse. But I do like the way the horse just separates itself from the background. I'm going to score this one 15. Ben Lomond in Scotland, and this is a nice landscape image. It's built of probably 4 layers there. We've got the sky, we've got the mountain, we've got those trees, and then we've got the water kind of in the foreground with the boats. And first of all, let's start with the sky. There's a beautiful tonal range in that sky, with a nice wispy enough of cloud in it. Not too much detail in that cloud to distract your eye. But I think that balances nicely with the water at the bottom of the frame. And then we have the mountain in the background, a little bit of haze on that mountain, just to sort of push it back into the background. And then we've got those trees on the left-hand side that really bring some clarity, and they separate themselves really well from that background. And also the angle of those trees create a nice leading line to the water and to that boat on the right. And then we've got the water in the foreground. The foreground for me just feels a little bit bland, a little bit kind of lackluster when you compare it to those trees and the rest of the image. Maybe doing something a little bit different, processing that water a bit different might help. But the boats are perfectly placed, nicely on the third, that right one, just to create that nice symmetry and composition across the image. A nice image. I'm going to score that one 15. So here's Birdman, and as soon as you look at this image, your eye is drawn to his eye. That orangeness of the eye and the sharpness and the clarity in the eye is just grabbing you straight away, and your eye just goes straight there, and it's perfectly placed on that third on that side, just to help your eye get there. One thing I noticed, but there's quite a dark image in terms of what this chap's wearing. The robes are very dark, and whilst there is a bit of detail in there, and we haven't lost it to complete black, I don't find it overly interesting, and it is a large area of darkness in that corner. And then we've got above him, we've got those feathers, which once again are great. There's loads of detail on those feathers that really help. Behind him, we've got this really soft building with looks like some lights there on the left-hand side. And what I'm finding here is I'm kind of trying to build a narrative about who this chap is and what this chap is doing, and I'm really struggling to do that from the crop that we've got. Maybe a bit more detail might have helped, seeing what he was doing with his arms, for example, or maybe going tighter because his face is amazingly clear and sharp and loads of detail, and a beautifully exposed sort of face area. Maybe a bit highlight on that cheek. No, it looks okay. It's just my screen, just give me a little bit of reflection. I do like this image, but I think maybe trying to capture it in a slightly different way or crop it in a slightly different way to give me a bit more of a narrative as to what's going on. But his face is really interesting, but I do wonder what's he doing and who is he. I will score this one 16. Here's Blackpool in Lancashire on the coast of Britain, and what we've got here is the steps that lead down to the coast, and they are providing a really good leading line to the tower, and we've got those vertical aerial balloon things, whatever they are, that stand up just to kind of lead us back, also towards that tower. Unfortunately, on this day, the photographer has not been blessed with great light. And it is a little bit flat, and that's kind of going into a bit of a grayness and a lack of detail in that middle area. The sky itself is good. It's well exposed to the sky. We capture the clouds nicely. They're not overly dominant. I think they're fine. But I think this whole foreground area and the buildings there, they just lack any contrast and detail, and I think the lighting here hasn't really helped. I'm going to score that one 13. Here's a blue tit, a very common bird in the UK. Most people have them in the gardens at some point, and here's one stood nicely on a branch, just keeping an eye out to what's going on. I mean, first of all, the background of this, the background is a great landscape background. It doesn't detract at all from the animal itself, from the bird itself that's sat there on that little branch. And what I would say is, the bird itself doesn't feel overly sharp in the face and around the eye. We've got a bit of a nice catch light in the eye, which is always a good thing to try and get. But its face feels a little bit soft. Which is really letting this image down for me, unfortunately. I'm going to score this one 13. So here's some waterfalls or some rapids not rapids, some waterfalls in Iceland. I'm not going to attempt to say what it's called, but instantly this is a wonderful area for photography. You just look at the colour of that water. These glacial waters just have that natural blue quality about them, and they just create this almost fantasy world, and supported by the slower shutter speed that's sort of messing and kind of milking out a little bit of that middle pool of blueness, and we can see that blueness kind of reflected in a pool further at top as well, and that crevice kind of just helps your eye flow back down to this blue pool in the foreground. I think everything else in the image it's very difficult with water to not follow the flow of the water with your eye naturally, and everything is well handled. There's not a massive amount of detail there. There's not a massive amount going on. It's all about, for me, that kind of crevice, that little gully there, and that blue water itself. It is a great picture, and I love the colour of that water and how it contrasts with the rest of the water around it. I'm going to score that one 15. Callum and Olivia, really interesting picture of two people. Don't see this pose very often, but you do see it every now and again. Two heads above one another, and it's a very symmetrical image with the subjects right in the middle, looking straight into the camera. What I would say is, the one thing that breaks that symmetry, which I quite like actually, is this gentleman's hair and the way it's kind of just going off to one side, the way it's styled. I think it is styled that way. I think there may be a little bit of wind that's helping it, but I can't see the wind blowing that much, because if you look at the girl's hair, there is a few strands of hair just blowing off to that side. I think one thing that doesn't help me with this particular image is, I think there's two things really. Is first of all, that the girl's head isn't quite straight. She's got this kind of just an angle on her head, which I don't think helps the symmetry of the image. And then secondly, there's a lot of darkness in the clothes that they're wearing, and you can't really easily tell where he starts and she starts and the background starts and finishes, and you are left with very much two heads in the frame. You can see the light on her shoulder there, which does help separate her from that background, and you can see the separation there, but I think there's a little bit too much darkness there. The other thing about this image is there's a lot of noise in this image, and you know what? I don't mind noise in this picture. Some judges may look at that and go, oh, too much noise, and you need to get rid of that. But actually, I think sometimes, particularly with these mono conversions, I think an amount of noise in the background can actually help the image, and I think it does in this case. Actually, it doesn't distract at all, because actually, if you look at the the faces, there's no noise there at all. It's just literally in that background. But I think the jumper and the angle of the girl's head, just a small tweak would really help this image. I'm going to score this one 16. Here's some flowers on a windowsill, and they're beautiful flowers. And I think the thing about flowers is sometimes people photograph them and it's very easy to oversaturate them very, very quickly. And I think the photographer's done a really good job here, just keeping that kind of natural feel to these flowers and not being tempted to saturate them too much. And I think they're perfectly placed in the frame as well. We've got the glass behind, and behind that glass we can see through that condensation, which, you know, a lot of people will be tempted to get a cloth out and clean that glass before they take that picture. I think what the photographer's done there is you just leave that, and I think it works really well, because that condensation does create a natural blur to the background behind, which we can clearly see as a roof, and there's nice bits of green on that roof to just give it a little bit of interest. I think one thing about this photograph that would help is the photograph's taken at a bit of an angle, and the perspective, you know, go from right to left isn't quite working for me. And what that's done is it's given us the windowsill down here, and maybe being a bit more square onto that may have helped that composition a little bit. And also these two pebbles just down here on the right hand side, for me, I think it would have been better either to remove those pebbles or to give those pebbles a bit of space so they actually form part of the image. Just having them on right on the edge of the frame just kind of distracts a little bit. But I do like this image. I love those flowers and the way they've been captured. I'm going to score that one 16. Here's another landscape. This landscape is of a windmill, and that windmill is perfectly placed right there on the top left third. And then because it's up on the top left third, and then because we've got these amazing leading lines, everything leads to that building. If you just look around this frame, there are so many things that take you to that building. First of all, we've got the clear one, which is this big group of flowers on the right hand side that create a line, supported by a second line there, just to the left. But there's loads of detail in those flowers, and we can see individual flowers, but collectively as we look at them, they just guide us through to that horizon point, and then up to that mill. Would the windmill have been better over here a little bit? I don't know. You can't really move these things. But secondly, looking at the clouds in the background and that sky, which is nice and subtle, with a lovely cloud there, not overly processed. Overly processed skies can work really well, but I think in this situation, this one's just nicely processed to give that wispy cloud and that lovely leading line from the right corner down and across to that building. The building itself is maybe a little bit dark, maybe a little bit flat, but you know what? I do like this image. You can see that on a wall in a cafe or in someone's home, and I don't think it would be a massive issue. I think it's a lovely picture, and I'll score that 116. Common blue butterfly here. We see lots of butterflies in this country, and they are very popular with all kinds of photographers and nature watchers. This one is caught particularly well. It's on a flower head, and that flower head is absolutely sharp where it needs to be throughout. The stalk is not sharp. That's not an issue. That's perfectly fine to be blurred as far as I'm concerned. And then looking at the butterfly itself, it's amazingly sharp. Look at the detail in those wings and on the butterfly's body and its head, and this antenna that's just coming towards us. We've lost the second antenna, which is soft. That's not an issue for me. I don't mind that. It's all soft. We can see it's there. I think it would be more of an issue if part of it was soft and part of it was sharp. But I think because it's all soft, we can see it's there. We know it's there. We know the butterfly's got two. Looking at the background is nice and diffused. But I think because of the colours of that background, there is an opportunity to complement or confuse with the butterfly's wings. If you look at these browns here, these browns are quite often all over the place, and I think they complement actually. I don't think it confuses it too much, so I'm not overly worried about that. But it's a lovely picture, and I think I'm going to score that one 17. Now here's a cuckoo with a caterpillar, and it's arguably the archetypal bird on a stick, bird on a post. But look at the detail in this picture, and look at the background. Look how that background is sympathetic to the bird, and look how sharp that bird is. And because of the sharpness of the bird, and because of the softness of the background, it just creates that real separation between the background and the bird itself. The bird is amazingly sharp throughout, and it's just a beautifully taken photograph. Even the caterpillar, the detail in that caterpillar, it's still, there's no blurriness in there. The post it stood on, again, tons of detail, all sharp. And then you move into that background, and the background, whilst it's completely diffused, it doesn't get in the way. And there's blobs of green there that replicate bits on the post. There's greyness in this background that replicate the greyness of the bird itself. And I think the rain just adds a little bit more to this image. Just creates that another just degree of dynamicism. Is that a word? It is now. Just creates another dynamic in the frame. So I'm going to give this one a 19. Here's a tree taken at sort of late afternoon, I would think, or maybe fairly early in the morning, but probably more likely late afternoon. Casting these really long shadows towards the photographer, obviously drops into black and white, and we've got this track that runs right the way through the frame into the distance. The tree is nicely perched in front of that sun, and we've got this nice starburst around the sun that's been captured. I find this image to be quite dark. And whilst I kind of love the top half of this image, and the bottom half of it, maybe not so much, because there isn't much detail. We've just got those big long shadows on that track. Perhaps maybe just focusing more on the top half of that silhouette would help the image a little bit. But it is lovely and sharp, and I do like that top image. I'm going to give that one a 14. Driftwood on the lake. This is once again another shot that's got very vibrant sky. The clouds really stand out against that sky, which arguably is a bit oversaturated, but I don't think it can work. And then we've got this lake that sweeps through the left hand side of the frame down onto the beach, and that beach just kind of takes over that right hand lower quadrant. The one thing that I would say about this is I'm finding this archway on the log a bit of a blocker, because I kind of want to see what's behind it. I don't know why I want to see what's behind it, but I kind of do. And I don't know whether just taking the photograph from a slightly higher elevated position would have helped get over that log, or maybe even be really brave and go down and shoot through it so we could see something behind it. But I just find that because it's not far off the center of the image, we've just got this big blocker. Maybe if we moved to the left a little bit, so that this was actually leading to something that would help. But a very nice landscape photograph with a nice foreground object. It's just a shame that I feel that blocks too much. I'm going to score that one 15. This evening glow picture, wow, look at that. I mean, this is one of those photographs that's got immediate impact. We've got that beautiful sky with the trees on either side, and then in the foreground we've got these bushes. And this has really got all the components that people want in a really good landscape. So we've got a foreground, we've got a midground, we've got a background, we've got a beautiful tonal range with that sun glow just coming across the whole image. And I really like this photograph. It really works for me. One minor criticism, I feel that this area in the center where the main core of light is coming from is maybe a bit too bright. It does draw the eye maybe a little bit too much, and detracts from looking at the rest of the photograph. So maybe just to tone that down a touch, But otherwise, I think this is an amazing photograph. I'm going to score this one 18. Father and son here. Another silhouette shot. Very, very tricky to achieve these silhouette shots when you're quite high above. And the photographer here has got that silhouette. We can definitely see it's a father and son. We've got their longer shadows, which indicates the sun is quite low in the sky. Maybe taken sort of early to late afternoon before the sun goes down. But we've got also the buggy, and I just wonder, is there another child in the buggy, or is that the child that goes in the buggy? Because that child looks a little bit big to be in a buggy. So is there another object or another child in that buggy that we can't see? I think because of the height we are, whilst we can see it, we do lose the separation. The separation at the top is great because with the silhouettes you don't have the detail. So you need to have the separation between objects so you can really tell what's going on here. And down here we just haven't got it. It's the buggy goes into the man's shadow. And I think if we look here, that I don't know whether that's a shadow of a tree or something, is kind of a little bit distracting there. But I do like the effort that this photographer's gone through. He's really thought about that, and I'm going to score that 114. Here's a portrait photograph of a chap with a gun, and very, very dark image on a black background, and he looked a little bit sinister. We're not too sure exactly what he's seen, but he's definitely seen something. One thing I would say is the thing that jumps out. There's a couple of things that jump out at me straight away. Is first of all this hand here, this foreground hand. I don't know what he's been doing. Whether he's been sat on his hand, because it looks to be rather red, very different to the colour tone of the other hand, and I find that just a little bit distracting. Ironically, the other thing is the guy's eyes. Now it's fine that he's not looking at me. Not all portraits need to look down the camera, and it's perfectly acceptable to have people looking elsewhere. But when you've got this firearm in the frame, you assume he's looking at whatever he's pointing the gun at. But actually, I think that the gun is pointing not where the eyes are pointing, because I suspect they're pointing at the gun's pointing. Well, the two things meet right about here, and there's nothing there. So I suspect that he's. I don't know. The gun just doesn't need. For me, the gun would be better if it lined up with where he was looking. But it's a nice photograph. It is sharp. His face is nicely lit. It's dark on this side, which just creates that degree of a sinister look. And then we've got this dark vignette around the outside that kind of removes the detail in his lower clothing. So I'm actually fine with that. I think it's just his hands and his eyes in relationship to that weapon, which would improve this image. I'm going to score this one a 15. Henry's stairway. Henry's stairway. Now here's another image. We see these stairways photographed a number of times, mainly spiral staircases, to be fair. And what I'll say about this image is we've got the staircase coming down, that's sweeping through into that foreground. We've got the child in the bottom left-hand corner. We've got another child just on the stairway itself, and we've got a little bit of interaction between those two children. This child here looks to be looking up at that child, and whether that child's focused on something else, probably isn't, and it isn't really looking down at that child, but it looks like he could be. We've got all this amazing detail through the stairway and the walls around it, and then above that we've got this mural that's painted, and I think that the tones of that are really good. And then we've got in the middle, we've got this light that seems to be casting a bit of an orange glow onto the walls there. But for me, I'm just torn as to where the photograph is, because if the photograph is the staircase, it would be nice to see a bit more of the environment around that staircase and maybe create a bit more space above. But then they've got this lovely interaction between the two children here. Maybe this child here might be better just sort of moved out. If we could have moved them out into the more into that third of a frame and just create them more of a central object, because it does feel like a photo of two halves. But it's a lovely place, and it's well captured, and it's a very good record shot of that environment. So I'm going to score that one a 15. Flowers photograph a flower in isolation it's surprisingly difficult. I don't think it's the easiest thing in the world to do. And here what we've got is, the overarching thing about this image is orange and yellow, mainly orange. And we've got this this flower head right in the middle of the frame, which is beautifully sharp throughout all the little, I don't know what they call them in the middle of the flower, the mini petals. Is it stamen or whatever it is? They look to be nicely caught. And then straight afterwards we go into this really softness of the petals, and I suspect they've been helped to be soft rather than being photographed naturally soft. But I don't mind. I think that draws the attention back to that the middle of that flower head. I think the colours work really well as well, because it is a very vibrant colour, and this is another picture that I could easily see on someone's wall in a house or a cafe or a restaurant or something like that. It just promotes summertime for me. I'm going to score this one a 15. Here's a lake shot, and this immediately has all the components to be a wonderful picture, and it's a very nice, peaceful, relaxing photograph. And you can imagine yourself just stood on that beach, just looking out onto the lake, and being there and chilling out. In fact, I'd love to stay in that little house, that shed on that jetty, because I think it's a wonderful place to stay. But in the background, we've got this sky. The sky is quite sinister, really, isn't it? It's obviously contain a lot of snow or something. It's not a nice blue sky. It's very cloudy in its own right. It's taking over some of that mountain. And as we come down, we've got this sort of snowy area here as we hit the water, and we've got the reflection of that in the water, and that beautiful blue glacial water. I'm assuming it's glacial water, because that blueness is just amazing as it comes up to the beach, particularly. And then we have this shed on the right hand side, which is creating that lovely interest, and there's plenty of detail in that shed, where you can look at all the textures in that wood, and underneath the boats just moving out and just creating that leading line. I think perhaps there's too many boats there, if I was being hypercritical, because it would be nice to have the boats coming, maybe 2 or 3 out and then stopping as a leading line to this reflection point. I feel that because there's so many boats there, it's actually breaking that image a little bit. And I don't think the brightness of that snow is really helping that. So maybe this would best be the third boat out would be the best one to finish on. But a really nice image. I'm going to score that one 16. Here's lunchtime with a red squirrel, and he's having his nuts or his fruit. I'm not too sure exactly what that is. And this is a really well caught picture of a little squirrel. Not overly common in the UK. It's quite rare sometimes, but there are a few around now. But that squirrel itself is caught really well. Really nice, crisp, sharp eye with a nice catch light in it, and then its surroundings are well caught, nicely subdued, nicely soft, where they're not interfering with the squirrel itself. So a nice photograph. I think if we were to lose a little bit of the background on the left and chop a little bit off the right, it might enable us to focus a little bit more on the animal itself. But a really nice, competent image, and I'm going to score that one 16. So here's Natasha. She's a model, obviously, and it looks like a pure studio shot, but it doesn't matter. That's a great way to take images, and dark skin, I feel, is very difficult to photograph, as opposed to white skin, which you've got a lot of tolerance on white skin. But dark skin, for me, it just seems to burn out really quickly. If you get that flash a little bit too high, it's very difficult to get back on dark skin. So the photographer's done a really good job here in lighting this girl, and particularly in the face, because she's got this large sun hat on. When you've got a large sun hat, it's easy to get the face in shadow and lose all the detail and just create a dark patch. But the photographer here has managed to keep that one quite nice and light. I think the pose is quite nice. I don't mind the hand on her arm and the hand on the hat. I think that's quite nice. And she's got this nice fun look in her face, which I think really helps. I think my two areas where we could improve a little bit, I think if we just tone down her hand a little bit, The hand just feels a little bit bright. Normally your eyes go to the brightest part of the image, and in this case they are going to the hand, which is holding the hat, and really like it to go to her face. So maybe we could tone that down a little bit. And the second point is the background is actually very nice. It's very sympathetic to the model herself. But what I'm finding here is she's got that tattoo, and I don't mind tattoos, but just because of the background there is starting to come into that tattoo, and the light down here, we're starting to lose the separation between the model and the background just on that part of the arm for me. So there might be 2 minor points, but I will score that one. I'm going to give that one a 16. So here we have some lobster pots treated in mono. And you know, if you go to the seaside, in a lot of places you see lots of lobster pots where lobsters are very popular for eating, and we've got a lot of them here. A lot of detail in this photograph, a lot of texture in this photograph, everything from the grass through to the pieces of wood, through to the way that the pots are organized, really creates that level of detail and texture, and there's lots to look at. What I would say is there's no central points. Look, there's no real area to focus on. I don't know whether if there was something in one of the pots that was maybe this one that would help us to just to create a focal point. I just find it a very busy photograph with nowhere that my eyes can really rest. I'm going to score that one 14. This one's called On the Beach, and it is a beach shot. It looks like a breakwater that I'm not too sure if it's broken or fallen away over the years, but it is there. And we've got this great strong leading line from the bottom of the image right the way through to the midpoint up there where we get to the bottom of the hills, and that there's lots of detail. There's a lovely vibrant green color. We've got the shadow of it there. We can see lots of detail, and in the distance we've got a small group of people that we can just about see. It would be nice, I think, if they were a little bit bigger and maybe a little bit closer, just to give us that more of a focal point. I think one thing here we've got is these vertical posts, which I think support that leading line down to the end of the rail. They do lose themselves a little bit in that hill, in that cliff face in the background. And I don't think that really helps the photographer in create the shot they were maybe after. Maybe if we could lighten these up a little bit so they do just separate themselves from that background, that would really help. And I'm going to score that one also 14. One man and his dogs. So this is a shooter. He's been out on a shoot. He's been fortunate enough to get himself a couple of birds. I don't know whether they're pheasant or partridge. And then his gun dog's there walking home with him, and I think this is a really lovely photograph actually. But I think the tonal range, again, I keep talking about tonal range because I think that's something that just keeps coming out in a number of these images. And this one again, if we look at the colours of the background and then the colours of his jacket and his sleeves and him, they're very sympathetic to each other. And he's nicely sharp against that background. It really just separates him a little bit from that background. And then he's got his dogs on both sides. And this picture creates a lovely triangle. You've got his rifle there, his gun, his shotgun there, and that just creates a nice little triangle from that dog to top of his head. And then his arm coming down here starts to create another side of the triangle down to his second dog. So there's lots of things there that support that beautiful composition. I think if I was being a little bit critical and wanting to see something a little bit more, I think we could lose a little bit of the sky, and I think it would be great just to give these two dogs just a little bit more space at the bottom of the frame, so that they were not sort of squashed into the corner. But a really great picture, that one. Just a couple of tweaks and it could be amazing. And I think I'll give that one 17. This one's gone out for a walk, and we've got here a chap with his dog, nicely on the third, stood at the end of that rocky peninsula, looking out to sea, and it really does tell a story. And what we've got here is we've got this bit of rock in the foreground, which kind of creates this arc that allows you to sweep round and lead out to that chap. The water itself is nicely diffused. That, you know, whether it's a longish exposure, it just creates that movement, that milkiness in the water. And then the sky itself, very, very, you know, what's the word for the sky I'm looking for? You know, a very unobtrusive sky, which is grey throughout, with that tonal range from the sun in the middle. I feel that the rocks, if there's anything that lets this image down, it just feels to be these rocks here. They just don't seem to have any contrast. They feel really flat and just grey, and maybe, you know, there's more detail over here. The lighting isn't amazing on the day, unfortunately. But I think we're getting away with it in these rocks here, but these rocks are not getting away with it, and that's a real shame. I'm going to score this one 15. Pillared walkway. We see a lot of these types of monastery shots in competitions these days, and you know, because we get these archways on one side of the image, and they allow a beautiful amount of light to come through, and even here we can see we've got the light and the shadow, the light, the shadow, the light, the shadow. Although it's not massively, you know, there's not a massive amount of contrast in that floorway. We can see light, shadow, light, shadow, light, shadow going down the room, and then we've got this large ceiling space as it feels like in the foreground, just moving down into that mid distance. It's a very nice picture of this walkway. I think if it's lacking anything at all, I think it would be nice to have something on that walkway just to stop your eye, because at the moment your eye just runs right down to the end, and then there's nothing there. If there was something, I don't know what, you know, logic would say a person, but it could be anything. Just something down there that just stops the eye and just gives you a focal point rather than just going off to infinity. That would really help. I'll score that 115. Here's a puffin. Photographed many puffins in my life, and they are in many respects easy to photograph, but in many respects difficult to photograph as well. You know, when they've got a mouthful of sand eels like this one has, they don't hang around for long. So, you know, it's not like this bird was stood there for 20 minutes while the photographer took his photograph. It was probably there momentarily. They land, they have a quick look around, and then they hop into their burrows. They don't hang around for these pictures. But you know, this one's nicely caught. It's sharp where it needs to be throughout. I think the rock is nicely exposed as well, which is sometimes a problem when you're shooting in the birds. You sometimes get the rock overexposed, but this rock's nicely exposed. And then the background of the sea there is lovely and blurred, and you can't really see what it is, but it's creating this nice blue tone in the background. I like this picture. It's a nice picture of a puffin, and I will give that one a 16. So here's 3 crosses, and these crosses are, I guess this is a religious sculpture made of looks like made of big chunks of steel or iron. And what we've got here is this amazing sky in the background, and that amazing sky with all those beautiful colours from the sunset or sunrise. I'm not too sure which one it is. But it's a very dramatic and powerful sky, and I think with these crosses that are not in silhouette, but we've got enough detail in there just to be able to see what's going on with these crosses and how they're constructed, and they have a very similar tone to the background, but yet they do stand out. And then they're on this mound, which unfortunately I'm not too sure whether it's a shadow there or it is actually a different colour. That we've got this disparity in colour here, which I just don't think that overly helps. It might be nice to try and tone down this shadow in the foreground, just to make that picture just that little bit better. But I do like these crosses, because you know we've got 3 crosses making a triangle. You know, there's no mathematical irony there, but you've got 3 crosses making a lovely triangle, and that amazing sky in the background. I'm gonna score that one 15. So here's Rose after a rain, and you know, another flower shot, and And another great detailed flower shot as well, super sharp in the middle of this flower. And the one thing I like about this flower is, we see staircases photographed a lot, looking down a spiral staircase, people looking down a spiral staircase to get that spiral into the bottom. And what we've got here is we've almost got the same composition with a flower. And as the rose petals come round and then round and round into the middle, we've almost got, if you could overlay Fibonacci's curve onto that, it would fit perfectly. And they're beautifully sharp. And where it's rained, we've got those droplets of water, which once again are sharp and just create that beautiful level of interest. And then to the extremities, we've got that nice vignette which closes the eye in a little bit. And then to support that vignette, we've got that softness as well, which it's almost a different kind of vignette, isn't it? It's where the vignette is blur rather than light. And I think that's a beautiful picture of a rose. And I'm going to score that one 17. Sitting Pretty. Here's a lovely boat. Looks like a little tourist boat, and it's sat on the lake. And we've got lots of reflections going on here, but also in the background we've got a kind of lot of greyness and nothingness. So this is a pure picture of the boat, the jetty, and their reflections. And although that boat looks super bright, I don't think it is. It's not blown out at all. I think that works really well, and so it's not blown out. It is very white, but we've got the very crisp blue of that, and then more on top, super sharp, and then a lovely reflection in the water behind, in front. And we've got this jetty once again with its own reflection. We've got a few birds kicking around as well, but that jetty creates a lovely lead in from the right to the boat itself. And then the water's a beautiful ripple, but not overly rippled. It's just a nice ripply picture. And then round here, as we start to go to the sky, we can't even see the separation between the boat and the sky. I'm not too sure whether the artist or the photographer's taken the sky out completely and replaced it with a grey graduate. It may have done, but I think that works because it does remove, because quite often when you take these photographs, there's lots of things in the water behind. There might be other hills, mountains, other boats, people, and I think this one's been handled extremely well. I'm going to score this one 17, actually, 17. Here's Splash. We see this type of picture quite a lot in photography, where someone's tried to capture the water coming out of a wine glass, and this one's been done quite well, to be fair. That the water is there, it's frozen in space, and we can see it clearly against the bulk of the background. What I would say is, because I'm not too sure whether it's just a red water or a red wine or a rosé that's in here. There does seem to be a whitish liquid in there as well. Whether that's ice cubes, I don't know. And it doesn't look totally red in there. And then the actual splash itself is going off the top of the frame, which it would have been nice to see the end of that splash if that was possible. But it's not sharp. It is quite blurred on that background. And the second thing about this image is, if we look at the whiteness of the background, we are losing the splashes which are coming out to white into the background, and there's no difference between the two of them really. So I think this area here, which has got lots of detail in it, lots of colour, that works really well. I just like to see that almost not replicated, but these longer splashes a little bit more detailed if possible. I'll score that one 14. Here's another one, actually, very similar concept. Splash of red, dropping a pepper into water and capturing that. And first of all, you've got this really bright red, vibrant pepper, which, to be fair, that's why people use peppers and strawberries and things like that, because they've got this vibrant red on them. And we can just see a bit of a green at the top of the pepper in there as well. But the pepper's underwater, and what we can see here is a reflection of that pepper in the surface of the water. And I think that wave that's created that beautiful curve across the middle of the frame really supports this picture. Then above that, we've got the splash, and once again, it's caught quite well. It's maybe not as sharp as it could have been with that splash, but it is caught pretty well. You know, right in the middle of the frame, which you would expect, and I think that works really well for this image. I'm not too sure. There seems to be something happening. There seems to be a couple of black bands there, and then I'm not too sure what's happening. This might be a bit of light leaking from the flash into the water, but it's a very nice image, and I was going to score that one a 15. Spring wood. Now, anybody that's tried woodland photography will know how difficult it is finding a place in the woods to take a photograph that actually comes out as a nice picture and not just a whole group of trees and a bit of a confusing mess is really difficult. I think the photographer has found the perfect spot here and exposed it really well. They've got these beautiful sunbeams coming in through the trees, just hitting this path at exactly the right point, and this path that kind of comes into the frame and then curves away beautifully past all those lovely bluebells. It is just an amazing thing to see, and look at the sharpness of these trees here in the foreground. They're beautifully sharp, and you know, they really create a sense of you're in the woods. Love this image. If I was being a little bit critical, it would be lovely to have something on this path as a bit of a focal point. We've got this focal point, which is, you know, the patch of light there. Everything leads down to that. But if there was a dog or a person or something just on this path, that would just lift it just that little bit more. But it's an amazing picture of the woods, and I'm going to score this one 17. Here's another one of those great tonal pictures, a landscape image here with a beautiful sky, nice and subtle, and that's just reflected into those beautiful tones in the water, those nice peaches and golds and oranges and yellows, that lovely cloud that's just drifting off those hills. I think that makes a beautiful picture, and now it's got that interest in the boats and the reflection of the boats themselves. But that little group of boats there on that third just really help to give that picture a little bit of interest. The one thing that I'm a little bit concerned about in this image is this group of logs here, and it looks like, I'm not too sure whether they've been placed there or not processed properly, but there seems to be a bit of a ring around them that isn't really helping these logs. I'd be tempted to get rid of them and just let that water speak for itself. But I can really see this one on someone's wall. It's a beautiful artistic photograph, and even with those logs, I'm going to score this one 17. Street lights on a pier, on a jetty-way somewhere, on a causeway. I think this is a lovely blue picture, and you know, for me, it's all about the interest of the lights and their associated reflections. You know, the sky is extremely sympathetic to the water. You know, they've got the reflection of the sky in that water. But I think the tonal range, I keep calling it tonal range, don't I? Sorry, but the tonal range of the sky and the water just match each other perfectly. And then just running through the image, we've got these trees and lights. I do feel that this line of trees and lights kind of just cuts the picture in half a little bit, and I'm not sure there's enough detail in the base and the bottom half, whether there's too much of that. I don't know, but I don't find the main subject of the photograph overly interesting, which is a shame, because I think it's got so much potential with these trees. I'm going to score this one 14. Here's a sunset, and you know, this is what sunsets are about for me. So many times we see sunsets of, you know, water, sun, bit of sky, and whilst the sky and the sunset can be very dramatic, there's very rarely something of real interest in the foreground. But what we've got in this picture is something of real interest in the foreground, and I think we've got a very great dramatic sky. You know, blue hour is almost, he's almost upon the photographer here. So we've got that blue in the sky, but we've got the sun still kicking around on the horizon, which is creating this vibrant yellow. And where the two meet, we've got those clouds that are just creating this real dramatic skyline. Sky. And then in the foreground, we've got the ground leading up to these trees. And it would have been nice perhaps to have a little bit more detail in these shadows in the foreground. On the grass, just to lift that up a little bit maybe, so we can see a little bit of detail in there. And then we've got the trees that are beautifully in silhouette. I like this picture. I'm going to score that one 17. So by contrast, we've got here another sunset. They've just ended up right next to each other, unfortunately. Whilst once again we've got this amazing sky here, where we've got the blue as the light's just about to leave the sky, and then we've got the horizon where the sun is, that's just creating this amazing gold orange color just riffling through those clouds, especially here. Just look at that, isn't that amazing? And then we've got a reflection of that in the water, and then we've got this silhouette of the bank. And I don't really think that silhouette of the bank really adds anything. If you remember what I said about the previous picture, where quite often there's nothing really in the foreground to grab your interest, and I think that's really happened in this one. But that sky is just absolutely amazing, and the sun just going down there. I'm going to give the one a 15. So here's a triptych of a dog, and done in a really nice way actually, because I always say with a triptych, each image has got to stand on its own, but then come together in a way that creates a new image with additional interest. And if you look at this, we've got 3 images, and they are very nice individually. Detail of a dog. We've got 2 eyes. I think it's the same eye flip, to be fair. We've got those 2 eyes on either side, looking into the middle. And then what the photographer's done here is, rather than leave the mouth down, they've actually brought the mouth up onto the same level as the eyes, which, again, it's a great picture of a mouth and the nose and the tongue hanging out. But because they've put them all in a line rather than separate them as you normally would see them, it creates that new interest. You look at it in a different way, and I really like that. So it's a very nice, well taken triptych, which I'm going to score quite well. I'm going to score that one a 17, because I think it's a really nicely done image. But also we've got black, we've got white, we've got subtlety. There's nowhere in this white is it blown out, and nowhere in this black is it completely black. So we've got detail in all the dark areas, and we've got detail in all the light areas. So it's extremely well taken, and I like it. So this is the final hurdle, and we've got this athlete running through the hurdles, and we can just see the power in that athlete as he's running there, and he is immensely sharp throughout the entire image, right from the very front of his shoe to the furthest point of his left elbow that we can see. He is absolutely pin sharp. He's been absolutely frozen in time. But looking through the image in the background, we've got every hurdle gets slightly more out of focus, leading into that blue background. It's always a conversation, always a discussion point, whether it's good to have crowds in the background, and a lot of photographers like to have crowds in the background at sporting events. Some don't. This one hasn't got any crowd at all. But I think in this situation, I think it works really well, because they've got that uniformity in the blue, and the transition between the hurdles into the blue just work really, really well. And you can see the absolute determination on that guy's face. That's my favourite image from the set, I think, and I'm going to score that one, or set so far, and I'm going to give that one a 20. So we've got time for prayer, and we've got this church here that's lovely, well lit on the top, and then we've got this subtlety again in the background, the sky, the trees, the water, all of a very similar colour tone, and then we've got the building sat in the front, and we've got on the top of the cross, we've got a little bird that's just sat there, that as you follow the spider up to the top, you're just rewarded with a small bird. I think what we've got here as well is, as we look at this roof is almost a leading line. As you follow that line there, and then you go up the verticalness, and then you follow the dome around, or the little ladder up the top, and you go to the cross, which is very, very nicely lit on the top there, a little bird. And I think there's a beautiful lead to that bird, but it's a very nice sympathetic image. I think these two verticals here aren't helping. They're creating a bit of a block, and it would be nice to see what was on that left hand part of the building there. I think those two verticals, and maybe this grass would be benefit from being just taking some shadow out of that grass and putting a bit of clarity back into it, a bit of detail back into that. I'm going to score this one 16. Here we have some tulips, and these tulips are in a vase. It's a nice study of a still life, but very well lit, with a lovely background behind the tulips. They always say photographing odd numbers, and what we've got here, we've got 5. That's a rule that I don't always follow, I don't always buy into, but I think it works well in this case, and it's an extremely present photograph. The tulips themselves are really sharp, which you would expect in a still life. Plenty of time for the photographers to get this right, and they have done. We can see into the flower heads themselves, and see the stamen in there, and all the other bits and pieces. They're not dark. They're well lit. It'd be easy for them to be too dark, but the photographer's taken the time to get that right, and to get the lighting on the flower heads just as they want them. So a very competent image. And I also like the way that, sometimes people photograph flowers in jugs or vases stood up vertically, and that creates a very long image. But if you look at this one's got this kind of gentle curve to it, but like a letter M in many respects, like a nice M shape that's sort of going through there. I like that. I'll give that one 18. Waiting. So here we've got a dog waiting for something, whether his owner's gone off for a long walk and not come back, or what, we're not too sure. But that's part of the narrative, to start thinking about what's going on here. And this is where a title can sometimes really start to help an image, because if this title wasn't waiting and it was dog, you'd be wondering maybe what that dog was just doing sat there. But now you've given it a title of waiting, you know it's waiting for something, and you start to think about, well, what can this dog be waiting for? And you're scouring the image for a clue as to what that dog's waiting for. I can't say, to be honest, what it's waiting for, but it's waiting for something. And then it's looking out to sea, and you've got this ruined pier, or the remnants of a jetty or a pier that's sort of going out where the dog's looking to. And it would be nice maybe to have something out there that gives a clue as to what the dog's waiting for. Another final point of interest at the end of that line. Drops into mono. I think that helps, and it simplifies the image quite a lot. And we have got the darkest dark areas, and we've got some fairly light areas in the dog itself. But it just feels a little bit flat, this image, to me, and maybe a little bit of contrast in there would really help. I'm going to score that one 15. Where's Tarzan? Here's a monkey of some description, or I think it's a chimpanzee, and just quite enjoying itself while the photographer does what he's doing. And although the head is turned away from the photographer, the eyes are looking exactly right down the camera. So the chimpanzee, the monkey, is very, very interested in what the photographer's doing. I don't think it's a very dynamic pose from the monkey. It's very difficult to get monkeys to pose, to be fair, but I don't think it's a very dynamic pose from this monkey. He's just sat there. He's not really doing anything, and the background itself is because it's so similar, particularly over on this side. It doesn't really create a separation for me in the way we've seen in some of the other images. So I'm going to score this one a 15. Who's in the Woods? So we've got a police box there. This is obviously a reference to Doctor Who, and is this Doctor Who himself, or is Doctor Who off in the woods? We don't know, but that just a little bit added from a degree of mystery from the title. This guy here is looking straight into the camera. He's taken up a large portion of the frame, which is fine because it's a portrait. And then what we've got in the background is these really mysterious woods, and the way they've been treated with the portrait part as well is just to give it that ethereal feel, that mysterious feel. And you know, all parts of this image are beautifully sharp where they need to be, and we've got that police box plonked right in there on the left hand third as well. Great picture. I'm going to score this one 19. So our final image, I believe, and this is another building shot, and you know, the title in the rain, Zion in the Rain, is you know, helps you to know that it is raining, although we can see plenty of rain coming down, and we've got people with brollies and people moving around, and you know, we see this done every now and again where we've got a building that's perfectly sharp and well taken, and then people with a little bit of movement in. And I quite like that. I quite like to see that in an image, because it so many times we see people really sharp, and just creating a bit of movement sometimes can really help lift an image and just create that additional level of interest. And this image itself is beautifully exposed. There's nowhere where it's really blown out at all, and that building is amazingly sharp, and those people just work with it nicely. And there's a second building at the end of that path actually that it just creates that other level of interest. What I would say, just a minor criticism, is I'm not totally sure that building is straight. It looks to be leaning over to the left a little bit, and maybe a little bit of a tweak on the building to get the perspective or the rotation of that would be slightly advisable or worth looking at. But I do like that's a great image. I'm going to score that 18. So that's the photographs that I've been looking at, and the scores you've now got. My image of the competition of this one. I don't know whether there's an award for the best image, but if there is, then that's my favourite image for the set. Thank you for listening to me drone on, and I hope you've enjoyed my judging. Thank you very much.